G'day legends, I hope that you are doing really well. Now today we're going to make a video on Ukraine and updates there, but it has actually been a very quiet day for news in Ukraine and map movements as well, but tomorrow we will be back with that. Now tomorrow the video will be released later because I'm seeing an orthopedic surgeon in mid-morning-ish, so we'll push the video back to see exactly what is going on in my arm. So I may be in a sling or in a cast or no idea what will be happening. But what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about Israel and give a quick recap on the past few weeks on some major events that has happened, as it's been a few weeks since we've actually talked about this. Now, there has, of course, been some major shifts on the mapping and an increase in violence and actions by groups in the region, mainly when we're talking about the Houthi rebels in Yemen. But on the mapping front, Israel has taken control of northern Gaza, saying they have completed the dismantling of Hamas's command structure in northern Gaza Strip. And they're scaling down the operations in the north and a withdrawal of soldiers, although operations in the south and from that north area down into the south will continue. So let's have a look over exactly how this is looking. So on January 7th, we had then this map being released. Now the mapping isn't as broad as what we get, say, for Ukraine. There's not as many places doing it, and you don't have these movements as easily to be able to be seen and cross-reference across other maps. But of course, this is northern Gaza. This is Sderot. If you're watching me, you'll be familiar with this area in here. Now, this was all purple at one point, of course. Purple is areas controlled by Israel. Now, this you'll see is back in now the green, and these areas by the blue is showing where these individual elements then withdrew out of northern Gaza back into the purple, back through rotations, and still an occupation force then surrounding this area. And it should be known that this area has been very, very heavily affected by this war. Many buildings, many suburbs, many whole areas in here were brought down to basically just rubble of almost 3 months of constant bombardment and fighting in this area. Although complete occupation of here and completely saying that there's no Hamas operating here would be a stretch. There still absolutely could be, from the amount of underground tunnels, the amount of pockets that could be here, but Israel's more focused on the command structure of this, working on sort of beheading the Hamas operation in here. So let's then have a look over how the map is looking today. Now this is on Syriac's Google map here. Now what you can see is this has turned back into grey. This is where was once occupied, then the withdrawal from the north here. Now, of course, we come down into the south near Khan Yunis, near Rafah. We know there's been, even over the last 24 hours, a hell of a lot of bombing into the center and south of the Gaza Strip as Israel continue its operation in the Gaza Strip. Now, it is happening somewhat of what we spoke about last time. So last time we spoke that Israel really advanced about to this family supermarket here. And we did say that there may be, or what you and I speculated about, was I push down this road here to try and cut not only the north and south of then this area we're looking at, but also then the east and west, making it a lot easier to close up these areas such as Al-Masada here. So that looks like they are pushing down these roads, but it should be known there's still very heavy fighting here and many videos of Hamas fighters attacking Merkava tanks, attacking soldiers, and a lot of civilians still falling victim and dying to the amount of bombing and the amount of fighting happening in this area. This is nowhere near done at this point. It may be taking longer than some expected. It may be far shorter than some expected. I know personally this has actually advanced far faster and far less deadly than I actually thought it was going to be when Israel first floated the idea of a ground operation into Gaza. So what actually was the effect of these operations in the now destroyed north? Now, like I said, Israel lost far less soldiers than I actually had thought would happen in the scale of these assaults and heading into this vast, sprawling urban environment and down into tunnels. And I think a lot of this is due to the massive air campaign that took place for weeks prior and throughout as well. But of this air campaign, this comes at the costs of tens of thousands of civilian lives, which has then in turn rallied millions around the world against Israel in the Free Palestine pro-Hamas rallies. Now, I will, and people will push back on this, there is a difference between Free Palestine and pro-Hamas. I believe that is still there, although that line can get blurred a hell of a lot. But sometimes within these, you'll see people flying flags of, well, say Hamas, you'll see Al-Qaeda, other groups in this, and you're going, where actually is this line blurred? But people, I think a lot of people have the right idea of protecting civilians here, and that is 100% how everything should be in war. First and foremost, the protection of civilians, their rights, their dignities, their life. But people also need to be realistic about what groups are operating in here and what groups are embedding themselves around civilians to use this as propaganda as well when the targeting comes through. And the main thing we see in then these rallies is calling for ceasefire and actions against the Jewish state, as well as a hell of a lot of anti-Semitism. But from all that I witness of this, I'm yet to see any real request or large requests on a mass for the return of the hostages taken by Hamas into Gaza. All these crowds condemn the use of brutal SA against women that we saw on the 7th of October, the R word I can't say on YouTube, the torture of anyone in the path of Hamas, and Hamas's supporters on the 7th of October who then crossed into Israel. These groups preaching for the protection of women and children. That protection for women and children needs to also be whether they're Jewish, whether they're from Gaza, whether they're anything. Those protections need to be upheld, and some of the hypocrisy that I see is unbelievable. On October the 7th, there was an estimated 240 people taken hostage by Hamas, and Israel believes there's about 105 hostages still alive in Gaza, now pushing over 3 months. On that figure, we are very unsure how they've come to that, but we're just going on what Israel released. Now, mediators today in Qatar announced there would be a deal done to get medication, prescription medication, to these hostages. As far as how this is going to happen, it's going to happen through international NGOs, but much beyond that, we just don't know. And as all this is going on, a South African legal team has appealed to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, at The Hague to argue that Israel's actions in Gaza amount to genocide and calling for an immediate ceasefire. These lawyers ignoring the raging racial battles that happen in their home country that many will classify as genocide. Now, from my reading, to actually come to a verdict of genocide in The Hague could take years, up to several years. And both sides currently are relying heavily on emotional arguments. With the BBC reporting, genocide is notoriously difficult to prove. There needs to be compelling evidence of intent by those actually in charge of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, as well as a pattern of behaviour by the IDF that cannot reasonably be explained as anything other than genocidal. It's one thing to be horrified, even enraged by countless images of the suffering inflicted on the Palestinians. It's quite another to conclude that the killing of 1% of the Gazan population, sobering as that number is, represents an Israeli effort to destroy the Palestinian people in whole or in part. But that is what is being argued at the moment. And let me know what you think of this. When I think of this militarily, strategically, if Israel wanted to genocide the Palestinians inside Gaza, their operation would have been far different, and the air campaign would have been far different. Now, the air campaign, as militarily impressive, if you want to say that, as it was with these, huge bombs, these multiple ton bombs dropping, if it was a full genocide, it wouldn't have mattered where it went. It would have been a far faster operation in here, and the casualties would have been absolutely unbelievably high. And this is where, when there's arguments of genocide being thrown around to actually prove this, when you have numbers at that 1%, you have bombs that are targeted, will be very difficult. And from the law bits and pieces that I'm reading on this, they're not really going to get it across. But what South Africa are sort of more appealing for to the ICJ is for provisional measures, while the case of genocide will be discussed over a long period. Now, the first of these provisional measures being immediately suspend its military operation in and against Gaza. And this could bring Israel's unfinished operation in Gaza to a halt. That said, the ICJ has no capacity to mandate compliance other than by act of the UN Security Council, so the 5 permanent countries, which in this, the US government could just veto, like we saw with the Security Council previously. So the actual power in making then Israel stop its operation is very, very limited. The Israeli Prime Minister has posted this on Twitter only in the past few hours from the Mossad and the ISA announcement. Cleared for publication orders from the organisation leadership, acquisition of UAVs and the use of criminal elements. This is how Hamas terrorist organisation senior operatives advanced attacks against innocents around the world. And of course, pulling out these members of Hamas political around the world, but also then putting down to people that are Hamas in the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and Europe. And many in circles that I float around with talk about the increase we could see in terrorist attacks in many Western countries as anger grows over what is happening. And only today, this is what the scenes we've seen in front of the White House from a Palestinian rally here. Now, I will say a lot of this is in good faith of protecting civilians, but when it doesn't have this is when we start seeing these flags being flown of known terrorist groups who have done horrific things and the justification of horrible, horrible acts by groups within this as well. And none of this is justified as far as what these terrorist groups have done. Marching for civilians, of course, is always justified, but I think it gets lost in mob mentality very quickly. Now, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who have spoken about a lot, they're currently in the find out phase of FAFO. And we've seen over the past couple of months the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea disrupting and endangering global shipping lanes by boarding and attacking civilian cargo ships, but boarding it via helicopter and soldiers and attacking with Iranian missiles. Now, then a joint coalition was formed to protect and keep these lanes open. These lanes have 15% of all global shipping. And over the past week, the US and the UK have conducted multiple air raids with support by Canada and Australia as well. And this is just one of these that we see here, the coalition strike on the 12th of Jan. You can see the Typhoons and the F-18s that have been involved. Now, these are E-18 Growlers, I believe, which are more an electronic warfare asset, similar to like this Hawkeye here as well. And these just increase the ISR capability for then the other aircraft working in these packets. But you can see the Canadians, the Dutch, the Australians, everyone involved in this because of how important this actually is to global shipping lanes. Let's have a look at, say, this, and I believe this is from the BBC. Yes, it is, the alternative shipping route. If these ships can't go through the Red Sea and then through the Suez Canal to the UK or to Europe from Asia, how much longer this is. Instead of 25 days, pushing out to 34 days. This straight here near Somalia, this is where we see a lot of the piracy happening. And we have some footage here to look at. This is off the USS Eisenhower, of course, the aircraft carrier that crossed into this region once we saw that invasion happen on October the 7th. And this is carrying out a lot of these operations. So this is the Hawkeye being launched then as well. Then we'll see the F-18s going, and these are running then these missions, dropping munitions on Houthi targets, said to have taken out up to 25% of their launch capability of these anti-ship missiles. These are the UK, the RAF Typhoons being launched out of Cyprus, carrying paved way missiles and full afterburner here. On that full afterburner, that is exactly why we will then see some of these refueling planes here as well. But if you're going to join the military, don't do what I did. Go and be a fighter pilot. Train hard at school. Job would be sick. And some of those pilots would have come back to the aircraft carriers, to ones that didn't, doing a bit of Buffalo Soldier with their massive ball sacks. Now, the Houthis have promised retaliation to these attacks. And Iran has denied any involvement, with Biden announcing that the US today has delivered a private message to Iran about the Houthis in Yemen, but no further details have actually been given on this. Now, if you ask me, all this that we're seeing, we haven't even touched on Hezbollah, this is just the beginnings to more global instability, not only in this region, but in this global economy, global world we have now, more instability abroad. As we've seen, friendships formed with Iran, with Russia, with China, with North Korea into the Middle East. Just have a look at how Putin was received in places like Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, compared to some other ministers. Look at where the friendships actually lie, where people's allies actually lie in this. I think we're just going to see the start of more proxy warfare through these elements. And of course, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, these are being used as a proxy for Iran to target Israel, the West, other areas. And there is far more in this that we can unpack at a later date with professional help as well, because I'll need that for how much it goes down. Legends, I hope this wasn't too boring for you. It's actually been a very slow news day everywhere, which is good when we do war reporting, because hopefully that means less people are dying. But I hope that you have had a great weekend and are going to have a great week coming up. Look after yourself, look after your families. Hope you're having a great year so far. Thank you very much. I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.